Hi there. In this video, I'll be sharing with you some information about the different types of legislation that have affected education and specifically special education, what some of those laws are and what some of the implications have for the education of your children in our school system. Unfortunately, legislation dealing with special education and discrimination, and in general the rights of people with disabilities really didn't start happening until about the 1960s. The first step in this was the Pennsylvania Association for Retarded Children, and they, in 1971, won a landmark case against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This case dealt with the 14th Amendment, which assures that all children have the right to a free and appropriate education, which is known as FAPE, and you'll hear that term a lot in a lot of these acts and laws. This case was actually kind of a precedent, and so it set the stage for the passing of many of the other laws that we'll talk about later. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This one was focused mainly on discrimination in general, not so much on education. It said that individuals with handicaps who were otherwise qualified could not be discriminated against just because they had a handicap. Originally, this was just in the area of employment, but later it extended to a lot of other areas, including healthcare, education, welfare, and social services in general. It gives very specific qualifications for being considered disabled, including the presence of a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits a person's major life activity, and it tells you what those major life activities are, and one of those is learning, in which case it would apply to education. And it also says that schools must provide for the FAPE, which is the free and appropriate education, again. The next major act is the Americans with Disability Act. You'll often hear it referred to as ADA. And this act was an addition made to the Vocational Rehabilitation Act that I just got done telling you about. And it required child care centers to be available to all who wanted them, including to children with disabilities. There again, you have the discrimination coming in. In addition, the act defined discrimination and the types of intentional and unintentional discrimination that commonly were practiced in society at that time. Lastly, the act set minimal accessibility guidelines for building and public facilities, which obviously includes schools. This is everything from accessible bathrooms to ramps to get into the school and necessary accommodations for students in the classroom. The next act is the Education for All Handicapped Children Act of 1975. This is considered the most far-reaching educational legislation that has passed to date. It stipulates that all people ages 3 to 18 must be given a free and appropriate education. There again is the FAPE. And the main part of this was Public Law 94-142, and it said that all public schools needed to provide education and one free meal a day to people with physical and mental disabilities. And the major part of this 94-142 was that schools were required to evaluate and create educational plans for children with handicaps, provide some services to parents when dealing with the special education process, and that most importantly, students needed to be placed in the least restrictive environment. And the least restrictive environment, if you've never heard of this, is the environment in which your student can best thrive while still being in as much of a general education classroom as possible. There are different levels of this. Obviously, the least restrictive in general will be the general education all the way down to a strictly special education classroom or school. Along the way, there were several actually many amendments made to these acts and different laws. One of the important ones that's worth mentioning is the amendments of 1983, which were made to the Education of the Handicapped Act, and it extended the fiscal authorization for federal aid to state and local schools, and dealt with some issues of reporting, and it also increased assistance to children who were struggling with vision or hearing impairments, and provided for grants for transitional programs to transition kids either from Head Start and early Head Start programs into school, or to transition kids that were in school into the later areas of life, including college or independent living, things like that. One of the other amendments is the amendments of 1986, which included infants and toddlers with disabilities. These amendments were also made to the Education of the Handicapped Act, and they established statewide, comprehensive, coordinated, and multidisciplinary agencies and programs of early intervention to children who had not yet entered school but were already struggling with certain disabilities. So in general, those are the important legislations that affected special education, and as I said, they continue to have a really great effect in our classrooms today. So it's really important to get a general base knowledge of those.